So here we have a brand new, right out of box, MORA Bushcraft Forest model. It's a beautiful knife. I really love these knives. It's a great knife, but it needs just a little bit of tweaking before it's just right. So this knife is actually not my own. It was sent to me by someone requiring my services. And let me explain what he wants done to it. So this knife didn't come with a shaving edge. It is not shaving sharp. It's actually pretty blunt. I can see a whole bunch of reflection along that edge when I look into the light. It also comes with a rounded spine, which some people like, especially for carving, but this knife won't strike a ferro rod. So those are the two things we've got to address. We've got to refine that Scandi and put a new edge on it. And we've also got to square off that spine to strike a ferro rod. I have a whole bunch of stones here in my straps. I was getting ready to sharpen this knife. I was going to show you how to sharpen it with whetstones, but then I figured if you're buying a MORA, you're looking for value, and not everyone's going to have $300, $400, $500 worth of whetstones. So I'm going to show you right now how to do it with just a few dollars worth of sandpaper, and the results will be perfect, I promise you. So before we get going here, we can have a quick look at this knife. I love the sheath. It's the first time I've seen it. It's very cool. These MORA Forest models come with this sticky rubber handle, and it's so comfortable. Nicely profiled handle as well. Just a beautiful knife. You notice it has, this knife has been ground here much thinner, so that Scandi doesn't carry all the way up. So that changes things a little bit, but not much. If it did come with a micro bevel, it's almost not recognizable. It's so small, but we're going to ensure that this is a perfect Scandi. The first thing we're going to do here is clamp this knife in my soft jawed vise so I can address the spine of the knife. Now, I understand not everyone's going to have a big vise like this, and you can do it on sandpaper. Using sandpaper, you can just file away your spine on a nice flat surface, but I like using a file just to speed things up. So I'm going to clamp mine in a vise. I just have a plain old Simmons Mill Bastard file here, and this is what I'm going to start my spine with. I'm just going to carve off, because there is a fair amount of rounding on this spine. I'm just going to cut it down quickly to a flat surface. Any old file, like a hardware store file, will work, although this MORA stainless steel is actually pretty tough, so you're going to want a half decent file. So buy a Nicholson. Lots of hardware stores sell Nicholson files. Grab yourself a good file, and you'll be able to take care of the spine of your knives really easily. So I'm just going to place my file on the spine of the knife right up close to the handle. I'm just going to start filing. Try to keep your file perpendicular to the spine of the knife as good as you can, so you end up with a nice 90 degrees. My way to check if a knife will strike a ferro rod is to do a fingernail test. If a spine will shave your fingernail, you have no worries, it'll scrape a ferro rod. And this knife will, all the way along, as you can see. Now, one thing you can do here, which is absolutely not necessary, but I'll do it because I'm doing it for someone else. If it was for myself, I probably wouldn't. But if you have a real nice surface, I'd probably work this knife lengthwise a little bit on a couple grits of sandpaper, just so you remove those deeper file scratches and end up with a finish that's closer to a factory look, so you don't have those ruffled file marks on your new knife. I'll just work this back and forth a little bit until we get a nice lengthwise scratch pattern, and you'll see that it'll look much prettier. So there we have it, with probably less than 2 minutes on that 150 grit paper. You see we have a couple scratches there that I still need to touch up, but that finish is almost perfect there now, and it gives a nice clean look. And it'll still scratch away at your nail because you haven't touched that perfect edge. If anything, you've sharpened it a little more. Okay, so now for sharpening the actual bevel itself, got some paper here. I have 220 grit. I have some 400 grit, and I have some 2000 grit. And those 3 grits will give you just a gorgeous finish. I'll show you what it looks like when we're done. But let's get started. You're going to want a nice flat surface. A real nice flat surface will give you something for your paper to stick to, and since we're sharpening a Scandi grind, you're going to need a nice flat surface. So I'm just going to dip my paper here in a little bit of water off screen. The water that my stones are soaking in. And you'll see now that when I lay this paper down and shimmy it around a little bit, it'll suction pretty well. We've almost got a little bit too much water actually. Let's get rid of a little bit. Here we are. It'll suction pretty well to that nice flat surface. So what you're going to do is lay your Scandi flat, lay your whole knife flat, and then just tip your knife up on its Scandi. And you'll feel that angle when it just sits flat down. And when it does, that's your working angle. So make sure you keep pressure on that Scandi. Just work it back and forth. This is 220 grit paper we're starting with here. I don't think I'll need to go any lower than that. After a few strokes, we can check our bevel and see how well it's cutting. So it's cutting very well, just to give you an idea here. And don't be intimidated at first. These knives come with such a pretty mirror polish that you almost feel like it's a crime to start cutting into the steel like that with a rough paper. But you can just put that polish back on there again easily after by just working up through a few different grits. So now that I see it's cutting well and it's doing what I want, I'll start rotating around that ring there. We don't have a big flat Scandi surface to hold our angle, but it is still big enough that you should be able to hold it no problem. I find if you just, as you're rolling back with your knife, if you just pick up the butt of the knife a little bit, and now I'm just about finished with this 220 grit paper. And how I'll finish is I'll do some single strokes and no stropping type strokes. So singles only into my edge, only cutting strokes. So we don't want any burr left on that edge there now. This will just take a few strokes and any possible burr will be gone. Make sure you hold that angle you've been using. And with just a couple minutes work, that 220 grit is 3M paper and it cuts so fast. Got to be careful. You might want to start with something higher, like a 400 grit, if you're not super familiar with sharpening. But that looks great. We've got a nice even scratch pattern all the way along. Okay, so now I'm going to switch over to some 400 grit paper and repeat the exact same process. So I just repeated the exact same steps with the 400 grit. Just a note for you beginner sharpeners, the idea is to replace the scratches from the previous grit with new scratches of a higher grit. So my goal when working with the 400, or let's start with 220, my goal when working with the 220 was to cover the entire surface of the factory bevel with 220 grit scratches. And once I had that done, the entire surface, and I had a nice clean apex, I could move on to a 400 grit. Now when I was working with the 400 grit, the whole goal was to remove all 220 grit scratches and replace them with 400 grit, and that's exactly what I've got done here. We have a nice keen edge.
This bevel you see here is right off of 2000 grit sandpaper. You see it reflects beautifully. Just a lovely finish. It matches very close with what came with factory or what's up here. So that's very nice. You don't need to go this high if you're someone that doesn't care about that look, that polish. You could stop at even 400 grit and you'd have a really sharp edge. Well, what would a sharpening video be without a little bit of shaved hair? Or some cut paper. They're pretty much interchangeable. You can see there the hairs just fall away from the blade. And this is no stropping. 3 grits of paper, 220, 400, and 2000. I will give it a little bit of stropping now just to even out that polish a little bit, and it will just perfect the edge just a little bit more, but it doesn't need it.
So there it is again with just 3 grits of sandpaper. And I mean, the amount of sandpaper I used for this project is maybe $1.50, maybe $2 worth. And you can see the results we get. Just a magnificent edge, a beautiful look, and I'm about to return it to the owner, who I think will be very happy. That spine is all sharpened up, and in his opinion this knife should now be perfect. Hope you liked this video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, leave me a comment down below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.